Good afternoon. My name is Dr. James Anderson. I'm the president of the Institute of World Politics. Thank you for watching this virtual lecture event hosted by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new to IWP, we are a graduate school focusing on national security, international affairs, and intelligence in the heart of DC. We have 5 master's degree programs, 18 certificates of study, a new doctoral program, and 2 online Masters of Arts program. If you are interested in learning more about us, please visit iwp.edu. It is my distinct pleasure this afternoon to introduce our guest, Dr. Jeb Nadaner, who currently works at SAFE, Securing America's Future Energy. He is the Executive Vice President of Government and Public Affairs at SAFE, and he is also the Executive Director of SAFE's Commanding Heights Initiative, which is focused on securing and advancing U.S. and critical allied supply chains. By way of background, Dr. Nadaner has served in many capacities in government and the commercial sector. Fairly recently, he served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. Prior to that, he served at Marine Corps University as the Director of the United States Marine Corps Krulak Center of Innovation. And before that, earlier in his career, he served as the Vice President of Engineering and Technology at Lockheed Martin. He has a PhD from Yale in history, a JD from the University of Pennsylvania, and a BA from Duke University. Jeb, it's great to have you aboard this afternoon as our featured guest, and thank you for agreeing to share some insights on this crucial topic this afternoon.
Fine to be here with the Institute of World Politics. Thank you, James.
So what a rich and important topic at hand here that comes up in the news in so many ways, and so many ways that are frankly concerning with respect to our national security. One of the points that we emphasize at the Institute of World Politics is, thinking about the different elements of national power. And certainly economic and industrial power doesn't always receive the attention it merits, frankly. So all the more reason that we welcome you this afternoon. And maybe just by way of easing into this topic, if you could help us a little bit with some terms, so we kind of know what we're talking about here. We'll get into the sort of the defense industrial base, but when we talk kind of at the highest level, the United States and its industrial base, what do we mean by that? And then maybe relatedly, you could also kind of share with us how that industrial base has evolved and changed over time with respect to international supply chains.
Sure. So I think every country has an economy. That economy consists of a set of capabilities. Some people call it industrial capabilities. Those capabilities include information, research and development, know-how. Then there is fabrication, making, vast supply chains running between the two. And the third large element is people that are educated, people that are trained, people that have opportunity for entrepreneurial release of their energies. So that is the totality of an industrial base. The United States started as a republic with a very small industrial base. And in the 20th century, we developed the most significant industrial base in the world. That industrial base was so compelling that it won 2 world wars for Allied powers. It was so compelling that millions and millions of people from around the world want to participate in that industrial base, in addition to our democracy. And they still keep coming. The problem is that essentially since the late 60s, early 70s, we as a country have been through several waves of deindustrialization. And deindustrialization doesn't mean you lose everything, but you lose some things. The first big wave of deindustrialization was with the rise of our allies, which was a project the United States wanted. It wanted Germany and Japan to rise up from the ashes, to participate productively in an international trading system. There was some pain in the United States, but we achieved a major goal of having these prosperous economies on both sides of us, and the rise of our other allies as well too. Then at the end of the Cold War, we cut the defense budget significantly, and with that closed a whole series of industries in American capabilities. And then we went through the third wave of industrialization with giving China near complete access to the American economy and its extension to the WTO. The result is, in a whole series of sectors, the United States lacks critical abilities. And we saw this during Corona. Don't have ability to make masks, don't make syringes, don't make pharmaceutical agents. But I think for those people that look more closely at the American industrial base, there's a lot of other weaknesses, and we could be suddenly cut off from a supply from abroad and find life really changes here at home. So the real issue is, are we going to go through a fourth wave of deindustrialization, or are we going to begin to reindustrialize?
Great. Thank you for helping to frame the big issue here. And I'm glad you mentioned China, because we'll certainly talk more about China throughout this discussion. So kind of having outlined these different changes over time and the kind of the point we're at now, maybe you could just kind of introduce the audience to some of the tools that the United States government has at its disposal, to create conditions, for companies or industries that can be helpful. So what are some of those tools, and then maybe say a few words about some of the kind of the pressing legislative things under consideration now, or those that have been passed recently in this realm.
So the government has several tools, one of which is tax policy. That's very important. What do you tax? How do you tax it? Generally, if you tax something more, you get less of it. Another issue is, does the overall tax system favor the owning of existing assets rather than producing new assets? So, for example, do you get more favorable tax treatment from owning a bond or from putting that money into the production of a factory? Different countries have different incentives. I would say in the U.S. we've leaned heavily toward bonds and stocks. You can get a better return for your dollar than actually investing in a factory often. Other tools are, what are the requirements to enter the U.S. market? Every country has this. They have requirements and barriers. So how low are those barriers? Are there taxes for the importation of goods? And what are the requirements? All countries have to make a decision how much reciprocity they want. The U.S. has erred on the side over many decades of insisting on virtually no reciprocity in its trade relations. And also we have perhaps the lowest tariff rates in the world. So those are, I'd say, some of the main tools. And the last tool is, what are the things that the U.S. government buys, whether in the defense budget or elsewhere? And what subsidies does it offer industry? Subsidies play a huge role all across the world. Sometimes subsidies are incredibly bad bets, and sometimes it turns out they can be quite shrewd.
So we're talking about U.S. government efforts in this area. Is it a question of kind of picking winners in certain industries, or is it more broadly, sort of setting conditions where certain industries can flourish with respect to foreign competitors?
So I think over the last 40 years, you had bipartisan consensus emerge around the time of Ronald Reagan, the first President Bush, and really synthesized by Bill Clinton, President Clinton. And that was lower the tariff barriers immensely, integrate China into the trading order, and let the market that existed, determine winners and losers. The result was loss of a lot of critical industries by the U.S. So I think, from my perspective as a conservative, if anything, conservatives should be empiricists. They should look at what actually happens as opposed to theory. So I think, and a number of conservatives and a number of liberals are relooking, saying, okay, well, the last 40 years experiment didn't work out as we planned. So what do we need to do? There are some people that, and there aren't very many in the US, left or right, that want to pick winners and losers. Like the government will say, this company's got a great technology, let's pump $100 billion. They'll set up huge factories and they'll make a certain product. There is a question about whether the government should be awarding subsidies to particular categories of industries, or whether the government should create conditions that encourage fabrication and manufacturing. I think I am very wary of a federal program administrator deciding in this sector we should award these 8 companies subsidies for their capital expenditures so they can erect a factory in the U.S. I'd much rather have the market do that. But the government can set the market conditions. For example, if the government created a tax break, significant tax break, for any company that wanted to erect a manufacturing facility in a strategic product, let's say 35% tax break for 7 years, that would be a huge spur to manufacturing in the U.S. And then the government wouldn't be deciding who gets it. The entrepreneurs would decide, do I want to seize that opportunity or not?
Thank you. What did you served in the Pentagon when COVID came upon us, and that entire the response effort, warp speed, and we learned certain things about supply chains, or maybe in some cases they were brought to light in sometimes painful ways about some of the weaknesses that we have as a nation that has to compete and is competing with some real strategic competitors. What do you think we learned from COVID about our supply chains, and what is the United States government doing?
I think COVID was a window into sort of a shocking degree of dependency the U.S. had on overseas supply chains, but particularly on adversaries, strategic competitors. It's one thing to be dependent on Canada and Mexico can actually be a great thing. It's a great synergy. To be dependent on Japan or Korea or Taiwan, those are all allies and friends. However, to be dependent on the People's Republic of China is another thing. So, for example, if China had not agreed to send us pharmaceutical agents, if they had not sent us syringes, we would have had no COVID response. We would have been crippled. So this time they were nice. Maybe next time they won't be so nice. You can see this, by the way, the issue of dependency on authoritarian regimes that are hostile to the U.S. and hostile to allies. You see this playing out right now in Ukraine. Germany has an unforgivable dependence on Russian natural gas. This is something that successive U.S. administrations of both parties were opposed to. This goes back all the way to Ronald Reagan and Secretary Al Haig. They thought this was a very, very mistaken. And you can see today, Germany cannot act on its principles and perhaps even its interests because it's so dependent. So have the Russians cut off natural gas to Germany in the past? No, but now it could happen. So China supplied us during COVID this time. The next time they may not, or there may be a very high price that we can't accept geopolitically, such as concessions on Taiwan.
It's just a great contemporary example of energy security and dependence. Another one that comes to mind, there was that incident, I think it was in 2010, between China and Japan. And Japan had detained, I think, a Chinese fisherman or trawler or something like that. And for a few months or so, China actually cut off some rare earth minerals to Japan. Really making a strong point.
By the way, we as a country, we have repeatedly cut off other countries from things. We are very aggressive about this. In some way, there was in Washington after Pearl Harbor, some people said it was Cordell Hull's war because of the restrictions that we had put on Japan. Very legitimate restrictions, but the thing is, other countries can do this to us as well, and sometimes they have. We had an Arab oil embargo in the 70s that put the country on its knees. So this can happen. This could happen easily to us and repeatedly to us, and we have to think numerous. I give you an example. Anywhere from 30 to 60% of the average Defense Department military system is stocked full of Chinese semiconductors and microelectronics. They're not the high-end semiconductors and microelectronics. It just so happens they are extremely powerful. These are the semiconductors, even semiconductors made 35 years ago. They are capable of hitting a target within a meter. They are capable of putting a person on the moon. So defense systems tend to use things that are proven and reliable. 30 to 60% of our systems are dependent. What happens if the Chinese cut off those supplies? That'll put the really 25 or 30 key sites, which we build most of our weapons. It'll idle every one of those factories.
So, in the news recently, Intel announced that it's going to fund some major fabrication plants in Michigan, and they're putting an initial investment down of $20 billion, according to press reports. May grow even more substantially over time. What's notable about this, at least to my eyes, is this is actually like the first time in decades that Intel has created a chip factory or planned to create a chip factory in the United States. And this goes to your point about kind of the vulnerability that we have. And this one example of Intel, is this a harbinger, do you think, of a manufacturing rebirth with respect to microelectronics and silicon chips? And is this something that, there were government incentives at play, or is this something that Intel, just for the kind of the sake of its own corporate health, decided that it needed to build these new factories?
So the semiconductor, also known, there's different terms people use, terms of art. The semiconductor was invented in the United States. And to this day, the United States produces the leading designs for semiconductors. However, the actual making of the semiconductors, we've gone from roughly 45%. We're down around 12.5% right now of global semiconductor production, and we're getting lower. Prime reasons for this are something called capital expenditures, CapEx. It's not especially labor, because a semiconductor facility does not use a lot of labor. So it's largely a question of what is called CapEx. It costs $7 to $15 billion to put up a semiconductor foundry. And by the way, it's only good for a few years before the thing basically needs to be regutted and all the machinery taken out. So what happens is in Asia, there are huge subsidies in one form or another, either huge tax breaks or free land or direct subsidies. The PRC has the greatest subsidies. They have the most to catch up. The reality is a lot of the manufacturing drifted over toward Asia to, I think, a dangerous point now. Because China is such an insecure environment, Western companies are coming to realize that whatever they build in China, they may not get to keep. I think a number of companies are interested in coming back home, coming back to the United States. So a company like Intel and Micron, they're looking into expanding their U.S. operations. Intel has had very significant U.S. operations, but they're looking to bolster them even more. And this is a good thing, the recent announcement out of Ohio. But I'd also note some of the best manufacturing technology exists among allied companies like Samsung and TSMC out of Taiwan. It is we have the best designs, they have the best manufacturing. It's vitally important that we have those companies investing in the United States and setting up foundries here. It's a win-win. First of all, we get exposure to their latest manufacturing techniques. Americans get exposure to it. Second of all, it brings our countries closer together. It's good for them because remember, Korea and Taiwan, they're on the front line. They're at risk. So they get to diversify their assets. So it's a win-win. We want to see Intel, we want to see these allied companies all come back to the US. Now, how does it happen? The companies need to make some significant investments, but also the state and localities do industrial policy. They always have, whether they are red states or blue states, and they do it well. They give tax breaks, they give land, they give trained workforces. The federal government, I think, and this is what's at play in the CHIPS Act funding, which is now being debated in Congress. The federal government needs to play a role to level that playing field between the United States and other countries. The issue is, do we want fabs? And I think the way different people in Congress think differently. Some want to see a subsidy process for more foundries. Others want to see a tax break. There's something called the FABS Act, put forward by Senator Cornyn and Senator Warner, who were also leads on the original CHIPS Act. We'll see how this plays out. But the country's going to have to make an investment either through tax or through subsidies to even out this playing field. If it evens out the playing field, I think a lot of companies will want to come back to the United States, and a lot of allied companies will want to come back to the United States. So it's promising, but we need to act.
So it's, if I heard you correctly, it's not so much the labor costs that are deterring or have led companies to go overseas and might deter them from coming back, but some other factors. How about the rise of inflation, which now seems to be less temporary and more permanent? Looking ahead a few years, is that going to discourage people from coming back to the United States, manufacturers?
5% inflation rate means that some entities are going to lose 5% a year, and actually some are going to lose more than that because it's never even. So inflation is an awful draw for foreign investment. So it's very unfortunate it's happened. There's been way too much stimulus in the last few years in the economy, and one would hope, for the sake of the American economy and American citizens, that there is going to be an effort, painful effort to reverse inflation.
So, Jeb, we've been talking mainly about manufacturing, and how is it on the innovation front? I mean, the terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but they're really, and they're related, but they're not synonymous. And
Yeah. So
is it
there's
safe?
sorry.
Is it safe to say that in terms of innovation proudness, like creating these huge companies that their origins come out of somebody's garage, that we still have we're in strong advantages and in a good place with respect to fostering, cultivating, promoting innovation, as opposed to the manufacturing dimension that we've been talking about.
Yeah, America is very strong in innovation, in part because you can't. It's very hard in America to disincentivize people thinking, people wanting to do things. But the innovation has especially been on the software side. The creation of the internet, the growth of the internet into its new platforms, social media, metaverse, gaming. These are actually largely unregulated areas. So a lot of entrepreneurship there. But the innovation in terms of the manufacturing, that's really suffered because there's so many disincentives in the United States, whether it's CapEx, extended permitting process, extensive private litigation processes, to actually making something. But at the end of the day, unless it's a video game and someone lives in the metaverse, for the rest of us, we need hard goods. The U.S. military needs hard goods. We need hard goods in our towns and cities, in our homes, in our businesses. We need hard goods in our hospitals should we get the medical care? That's been the lack. So the innovation's there, the spirit's there. We need to rebalance. And then also, many of the great products in the world, they often have their origins in a design that was done in the U.S. So it's very important for us to keep that design ecosystem strong, vitally important. That's the secret sauce, but we need that other piece also, the making. We don't need to make everything here by any means. We do need to make more.
Okay. How about if you could say a few more words about our dependence on rare earth minerals and maybe even about lithium. I mean, we talk about the Department of Defense and its dependence on microelectronics. We're also, the Defense Department is very reliant on batteries and for all sorts of, for drones, for planes, for ships, and so on and so forth. And yet, when we look at the kind of the supply of lithium, my understanding is that we are very dependent on foreign sources. And in contrast, the China actually indirectly or directly controls 3/4 of the lithium supply. So if that's if that's accurate, what is the remedy here? What do we need to do? And let me broaden it even more, not just for the United States military to reduce its dependency, but as the United States thinks about moving forward with electric vehicles and reducing carbon emissions over time, how do we do that if we're so dependent upon foreign sources for lithium batteries?
Yeah, listen, everything that has substance that we use comes somewhere off the periodic table of elements. There's a reason why we all learn it in grade school or high school. And all those elements, they exist somewhere in the world, and they need to be processed, and they're turned into chemicals. And then sometimes from chemicals, whether they go from a gas to something that's tangible and physical. There is a set of things that are called critical minerals, and then there's rare earth elements. The rare earth elements, they are rare, but they're not as rare as one would think. Different parts of the world have different geology. The U.S. has a fair number of minerals and rare earth elements, except we don't compared to our history, we do much less mining. Basically, since the 60s, there's been a vast decline in mining. It's not a very attractive place to open up mining because of a number of the regulations and litigation. And then in terms of the more important than the mining is the processing. And we do virtually no processing in America anymore. So China has, in addition to whatever it has on under its own land, it's locked up contracts for lots of major important mineral and rare earth element supplies from around the world. And it outcompetes everyone else through subsidies to get those contracts. And then furthermore, they do a huge amount of processing in China. Now, this processing is done in a very often in the most environmentally devastating way. Something that no American, right or left, would find acceptable. Not to mention the greenhouse gases. I think the issue for the country is we've advanced, the major environmental laws got passed in the late 60s and early 70s. We're now in the year 2022. Technology's advanced a lot. A factory that makes silverware is a lot cleaner and a lot different than it was in 1968. The same thing goes, our ability to mine today in an environmentally responsible way is much, much greater these 4 decades out, 5 decades out. Our ability to process, we have ability to process cleanly today. These are things that we can do. So I think for both reasons of national security, economic security, and finally for the reasons of the environment and CO2, we ought to be doing a lot more of this in the US. And the same thing goes for allies like Canada, Mexico. They can all do it cleaner than China does it. So I think one of the large tasks that the United States has in terms of looking at its allies and friends around the world is how do we create an alternative supply chain? Some things we need to do here. We need to unlock the system in the United States, update it for 2022. And then other things we need to work with other countries and say, perhaps it can be done in India. Perhaps the processing can be done in Mexico using the latest technology. And that'll become our alternative supply chain for many of these minerals and elements. Now, electric vehicles, batteries have been a big part of the US economy for 100 years. They are essential on every naval ship. Every soldier goes out with batteries, and we all have batteries for our kids' toys, which are vitally important. But everything depends on batteries. Hospitals have batteries in addition to generators. Okay, so batteries are key. If electric vehicles become, if the market grows for them, and there's a good chance they will, with or without government intervention, those batteries right now, the guts of those batteries are going to come from China. When you read those stories about battery factories, battery plants being opened up in the United States, those are largely factories that are assembling the precursors that are made elsewhere. Remember, a battery starts with some sort of raw mineral. It has to be processed umpteen times, then gets turned into battery cells. Battery cells then get assembled into battery packs, and battery packs get assembled with batteries. So it'd be an awful situation if the United States, which has worked so hard over the last 35 years after the trauma of being cut off from Arab oil, we worked so hard to open up natural gas. We worked so hard to open up residual oil that exists in our geology, something called fracking. It would be a shame if we traded away the measure of resiliency and independence that we got and handed it over from a turbulent Middle East to a despotic China. So my analysis of the trends are, I think electric vehicles are coming. I think people are going to find them very attractive. I don't know in what year there's a tipping point. but I do see the risk that of our desire as Americans to get what we want now will lead us to import these things, and that would become a problem if suddenly they're cut off. So the only alternative is to begin to develop our own supply chains. And we've actually set up in our organization, Safe Commanding Heights, we have a Center for Mineral Strategy. We're the only Center for Mineral Strategy in a think tank in town, because we think this may be one of the seminal issues of the next 20 years for the U.S. economy and U.S. national security.
But, I mean, we've been talking largely kind of a macro scale here of trends and U.S. government policy, but maybe you could say a few words about, companies that have moved overseas, and it just seems to me that they're naturally going to pursue the bottom line, right? They're going to try to maximize shareholder value, and this has become, for the reasons that we've discussed, a tad problematic. And it used to have that old cliche, right? What's good for General Motors is good for the United States. In certain cases now, companies operating in China may not be good for the United States. So your thoughts on kind of the company level motivations with respect to the national good that we're talking about?
Yeah, the companies are owned by shareholders. They have to respond to the shareholders. And they have to return as much profit as they can to the shareholders. And almost everyone today has some stake, has some market portfolio, whether through a 401k plan or personally. I think the problem is the boundary conditions, the market conditions. We have a situation in which the U.S. has basically an open market, and it's competing against a very capable country, namely China, that has a relatively closed market. So with lots of subsidies. So the result is companies have an incentive to go make things in China and return more profits to their American shareholders. I think the only way to redress this is to reset the boundary conditions. I think we have to make it much more difficult for Chinese goods to be imported into the United States if we don't have the same access there. And we know now over 35 years, we do not have that access there. We will not get that access there. If we get access, it'll be a very short window. So there is no choice, I think, but for the United States to face up to the fact that it's going to need to we keep demanding equal access. After 3.5 decades, we need to stop demanding and we need to raise a border adjustment. We need to have import duties. In that case, it won't always pay for a U.S. company to make something in China. It may suddenly make sense to make it in the U.S. or make it in Thailand, but we do need some made out of China. That is vital for us. We need diverse supply chains.
So your thoughts and your insights are generating a lot of questions from our viewing audience. So let me bring some of those questions to your attention. There's a question here about the Defense Production Act, which goes back to 1950, and whether that needs to be updated or refined in a way that's going to help some of the concerns that we're talking about this afternoon.
Yeah, the Defense Production Act is a very, very powerful tool, provided it's funded. It's received, particularly in the COVID era, Congress and the executive branch sought a lot of funding, the Defense Production Act, to flow funds for the purchase of things for corona-related supply chains, and also to fund companies that were producing the right things. But historically, or at least in the last 10, 15 years, the Defense Production Act hasn't been that active because it wasn't funded that much. So I think it's a good tool. I think Congress and the administration need to think carefully through, if we are in a strategic competition with China, that's going to last decades, and they're very formidable. I think we need to think through, okay, what is the level of funding that something like the Defense Production Act needs on an ongoing basis? Because once, if you had a certain level of funding, there can be planning. Business can plan around it. The Department of Defense can plan around it. But I think that's the key question. If the funding is somewhere in the, if it goes back to historic levels, it's extremely low. So we need to think beyond Corona. And we have to target, I think, a number of sectors that are really, strategic sectors that the entire country depends on, and also technologies and the manufacture of them that are game changers, that give the United States, a 2 to 3 advantage over China, economically and even militarily.
Okay. So on the issue of funding, we have another question here about the CHIPS Act. And the question is, there's an addition of significant short-term funding for innovative manufacturing. The question is, are you confident that these entities will retain or source the funding, enough funding that it takes for long-term fabrication production as chips develop over time? In other words, do we have more than kind of a short-term incentives here in terms of additional funding?
Well, I think right now there are various proposals on the Hill, and they are changing. Until we see the final draft, we don't really know what it's like. But what I would eventually this legislation will enter conference at some point, whether it's in the next month or a year, I don't know. But it's going to be vitally important that the funding be of large enough size to make a difference, that it be geared toward. There should be certainly an element for R&D to keep up the United States' edge, but enough funding for fabrication. The funding needs to be able to move out quickly enough, and then the whole thing has to be not about dealing just with the chip shortage right now, but how to position the United States that we don't go from 12.5% of global production to 10% of production in the next few years. Could we even climb up to 14%? That would be an accomplishment. So a lot of that, I've got lots of opinions on how the legislation should be crafted, but I think it's premature. We just don't know the state of play on the Hill, which is occurring in closed doors and is changing almost week by week.
Then we have a sort of a historical trend question here. Essentially, the issue is that the questioner notes that there was some deindustrialization that actually began back in the 60s and the 70s, prior to the rise of Chinese industrialization. So even if we are able to protect ourselves against China and remedy the situation there, might we just find that elements of our manufacturing base are going to be exported to other nations? In other words, isn't the problem just larger than China?
The problem is larger than China, but a prime difference is most of those other countries, they're not hostile to us. They're not hostile to our way of life. They have a lot in common with us. There's a lot of things that we can negotiate with them. Japan and the U.S. had huge trade conflicts in the 1980s. And because Japan had an interest in maintaining a solid and very intimate relationship with the United States because of the alliance, Japan made a number of concessions. Did it make all the concessions the United States wanted? No. Would we have liked them to make more concessions to even out the playing field? Yes. But they made a lot of concessions. Look at all the Japanese car plants in the United States. That's all a result of, that was an outcome of that trade dispute, resolved nicely. With China, this is a different problem. We are not worried about Japan or Germany cutting us off from vital supplies. But I think we should worry about China. We should worry that should it begin to interrupt shipping out of Taiwan, we suddenly will not have enough high-end semiconductor chips. So it's a different matter. And we have to, I think we have to deal with it'd be nice to deal with all the problems immediately. I think we need to deal with the most important problems now.
Okay. And if we broaden this beyond sort of congressional actors to public support, there's a question that's has essentially is asking, how do we garner more support for American industrial policy? How do we do that? I mean, you have your organization, of course, which plays a clear role in this, but what else can be done in terms of kind of educating the public on this issue?
Yeah, we industrial policy is probably it has a number of different meanings to different people. I tend to think in terms of economic strategy, industrial strategy. Industrial policy often has a connotation of the government picking winners and losers among particular companies. I think what's unfortunate is the country went through this, yet another wave of significant deindustrialization. And if you look at the political landscape, there's hardly any discussion of it at all. President Trump is really Ross Perot raised he raised the issue when he ran against President Clinton and the first President Bush. He raised the issue. He didn't get a lot of support on the issue. Trump ran on this, and he began slowly but surely a number of policies and began to change the debate. But the debate needs so much more. There's so few politicians that talk about manufacturing and what it means for American prosperity. We know that manufacturing is the key to middle-class jobs. In a country that's suffering from inequality, manufacturing could make a huge difference. In fact, I think a lot of the discontent, right and left in America, has to do with the fact that too many people live in hollowed-out towns, and there's really not the range of economic opportunity for them. Not everyone is geared to be an accountant or write software, but jobs in factories, yeah, some of them are no one would want. But today, in a kind of factory that Lockheed Martin has in Fort Worth, this bears no resemblance to 1955 almost. The equipment, you don't necessarily need a college degree, but you need to be smart. You need to be able to go through electronic blueprints. You need to be operate a complex machine tool. It takes lots of training. These are very satisfying jobs. We have too few of them in the country. I think one of the issues we're going to see right and left in the coming years are a number of politicians beginning to grapple with the issue of economic capacity. How do we create more jobs for middle-class lives? And I'm hoping that there'll be more debate. We as an organization, Safe Commanding Heights, this is what we're about. And we bring together Fortune 500 leaders that care about this issue. We bring together retired 4-star generals and admirals that care about the issue. So we're at the early stage of a movement. But we intend over the coming year to bring in Democratic leaders and Republican leaders and ask them questions about these things, offer our research. And I think we're going to be pushing on an open door. But I think Americans need to ask for it because I don't think they hear enough about it. There is virtually nothing Americans cannot do. We have proven that repeatedly in our history. I walk down the street and I just look at the energy of Americans, immigrants, people that have been here multiple generations. We are really among the most talented people in the world. But we have to set our minds to do it, get the public policies right, and then I'm convinced we certainly have the citizenry to do this kind of work and to do it brilliantly.
Okay. So we've got another question on the legislative front from somebody viewing us on Facebook, and they're asking if you could say a little bit more about the on the Senate side, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, as well as on the House side, the America Compete Act, and how those two pieces of proposed legislation will help improve our microelectronics industry with respect to the defense industrial base.
So each piece of legislation has some excellent elements in it. They'll Senate and House conference will come together, and there'll probably be a few pieces from each legislation that enters a final bill. Whether that final bill could then attain a majority in each chamber, I don't know. There are a number of details to be worked out. I've been in the legislative business for 2 decades. My experience is that whatever you see in the public document, it has vast changes by the time it becomes law. So a lot of those changes happen at 3 a.m. And we are active in this process. So that's about as far as I can go. But we're going to be working for the best piece of legislation for semiconductor microelectronics capacity for the U.S. And we very much want to see a level playing field in which U.S. companies can invest more and do so profitably. And we also want to see allied companies come to the U.S. and invest as well, too.
Okay. We have another question about kind of the workforce that would be able to populate this effort to bring manufacturers back to the United States. And the question notes that, for big companies like Lockheed and Boeing, they can, they have the resources to fund advanced credentialing and skills training. But how will more medium-sized and small enterprises be able to fill the workforce with capable workers?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is few people go to school and study an area that they think there'll be no jobs in. So you need more manufacturing capacity for our technical schools and our universities to produce the people. The second thing is, the large companies invest a lot. I have to say, small and medium-sized businesses invest a huge amount as well too. Very few people, especially for manufacturing, come in with the exact skill set. What they are looking for people that are they have to be literate. They have to have good quantitative skills. They have to have good work habits. So the issue in the United States is create a demand signal. This is a role that the federal government and state and local governments certainly can play a role in. By the way, you have a number of companies, some of the Fortune 500 companies and some smaller companies, they come together. There are consortiums all over the country to train people. And the reason why companies participate and invest in this is they figure someone will get the trained worker. So we have a decent amount of it. We could use more. I think that as a country, in terms of our economic strategy, we are overweighted. It'd be nice I think there's a lot of people that go to college and really they would be much happier in a post-high school, a technical degree, the kind of thing you have in Germany, where they would work on some of the quantitative skills, the skills they need to operate machinery. College won't necessarily give them that set of skills. So we invest a lot of money as a society and as families and as individuals in college degrees, when perhaps a 2-year degree that had more of a technical focus could actually lead to a much higher paying job in the future and more satisfying.
I'd like to return to some of our allies and partners on this. We talked earlier this afternoon about Germany and kind of its precarious situation now that it's become so dependent on Russian energy supplies. When we think about some of our other allies around the world, the UK, France, Japan, Australia, how are they thinking about the China issue and supply chain vulnerability? Are they generally in alignment with us? Are they sympathetic? Are we working with them to coordinate to reduce kind of mutual vulnerabilities with respect to the PRC? Your thoughts?
Japan on its own, particularly after its experience of getting a cutoff of certain rare earth elements, Japan watches China closely. Japan already started moving out a few years ago to begin to build alternative supply chains, to begin to reshore more businesses back home. UK and Germany, France, Italy, there are many thoughts in these countries. The U.S., both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, has spent a considerable amount of diplomatic time talking to allies about the risks of using certain Chinese products, the need to create alternative supply chains. I think what's missing is I think the administration needs a serious diplomatic economic initiative, a multilateral initiative that says we need to create these new supply chains in the world. We need to have the supply chains on the technologies of the present and the future, and invite India, the UAE, the Southeast Asian nation countries, Australia, so the Quad, together with what is called the INTIB, Canada, Mexico, and a number of the European countries, bring them together. I mean, I'd love to see a presidential level summit that comes out with a declaration that says, we're going to do this, we're going to create the public policies, we're going to make the investments, and there are going to be a lot of winners out of this. Different countries may specialize in different aspects of the supply chain, but we are going to have a diversified set of supply chains which manages risk. And I think that would be a wonderful thing. And I think that's something that there'd be a lot of bipartisan appeal. And I think it would catalyze the fence sitters among some allies. And I think for other allies like India, it'd be welcomed.
Jeb, we just have a couple minutes left. I'm wondering if there's any kind of big issues that we've missed in the past hour that should be raised at this point.
I think the largest issues in the United States are going to be can we get tax policy right to incentivize manufacturing as opposed to outsourcing, and then what is the border adjustment for countries that are not reciprocating and taking advantage and engaging in cyber theft of our IP. That's really the top issues, two top issues, and that's what we need to grapple with. And I think that if we could get those policies right, and we could get a bipartisan majority around it, I think that in 15 years we would see a very different landscape in America. And by the way, this is the policy. The policies I'm talking about: reciprocity, border adjustment, tax policies. This is right out of Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay's and FDR's playbook, and Eisenhower's playbook. This is vintage American economic policy. And I think our big problem is that we strayed from it, and we need to return back to our roots. So I'd encourage everyone not just to listen to Hamilton, the musical, but read Hamilton.
Jeb, on that note, I want to thank you on behalf of the Institute of World Politics for sharing your experience and your insights tonight on really a crucial topic. Key importance of our defense industrial base and how we remain competitive, how we minimize vulnerability. Thanks to you, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. So very much appreciated. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in here on Zoom and Facebook for attending. If you're may be interested in attending other IWP events, webinars, or supporting IWP, please, or applying to one of our graduate programs, please visit iwp.edu. That's iwp.edu. Again, thanks to all and have a great evening.
Thank you.